Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Philosophy Hour of Literary Tales. I'm your host, Paul Krause, and in this episode, we're exploring the philosophy of John Locke and what is actually entailed in his so-called law of nature. One of the great debates of scholarship surrounding Locke is his natural law, or law of nature theory. There are those that argue he stands squarely within the Ciceronian, Augustinian, Thomistic tradition, wherein the natural law is not only moral, but it will, at end, produce happiness for us. For that is what the natural law, the teleology of the natural law, is all about. Happiness. There are others who claim that the law of self-preservation, which is the basis of Locke's law of nature, is amoral, as reflected in how the state of nature eventually descends into the state of war, according to Locke in the second treatise, which subsequently propels humans to leave the state of nature and join the social compact society. And as a result, the law of nature is purely pragmatic and practical. It isn't aimed at any sort of higher teleology of happiness, as in Cicero, Augustine, or Thomas Aquinas, but is therefore purely relegated to the realm of the material and the practical. So which is it? The proper answer to Locke is perhaps both, in part because Locke is actually a dualist, though the manifestation and the ramification of his philosophy is materialistic and hedonistic in application. The law of self-preservation is both moral and amoral, but it is one that is undergirded by the sense of the idea of progress, practical progress in the movement out of the state of nature, out of the state of war, and into social contract society. Self-preservation, as Locke describes in the second treatise, will, first, and must necessarily exhaust itself into that state of war between individuals in competition with each other. Only after this descent into war does the law of nature, that is self-preservation, lead to humans coming together to form the moral social compact with one another, thereby transcending the state of nature and entering and creating civil society. This, therefore, is crucial to understand. In order for the law of nature to become moral, since it is not intrinsically moral, it must first descend into amorality or immorality, so as to teach us what not to do, because of Locke's blank slate epistemology. In other words, we learn by negative experiences first and foremost in Locke, and that is what drives the pragmatic application of the law of nature. The law of self-preservation becomes moral only after we descend into the state of war, because in the state of war we come to understand that the law of self-preservation is dependent on more than just ourselves as individuals. It is dependent on other people, not only recognizing their desire for self-preservation, but others' desire for self-preservation as well. There is a recognition that occurs in this state of war, that my well-being is tied up with your well-being, and that well-being, of course, is purely bodily and material. Without this mutual recognition, we would be trapped in the endless state of war. Because of this mutual recognition that occurs in the state of war, leading to men forming a compact together and recognizing their rights to self-preservation as endowed to all by the law of nature, we can say that the law is moral from this progressivist and empirical perspective that Locke embraces. But because the law of nature must first descend into the state of war, where killing and harming other humans must first be done to others before that mutual recognition happens, we can also say from a transcendental perspective that the law is amoral at best or intrinsically immoral at worst, since the state of war is the natural manifestation of human relations, and that is only overcome through that recognition of each other's want for self-preservation and material well-being that leads us to form the social contract. The moral argument that is part of Locke's understanding of the law of nature stems from a blank slate, progressive, and empirical reading of the law of nature. While today we know this is complete hogwash, the fact is this is the view that Locke himself held, and his entire continuity and progression of politics stems from that blank slate, progressive, empirical reading of the law of nature. The only natural thing to humans is the law of self-preservation, which is good because it is natural. However, since the mind is a blank slate, according to Locke, and has no innate understanding of goodness, that goodness is only revealed through experience, through negative experience. And the first experience, therefore, of the law of nature will be conflict between others, because self-preservation is only about the self and not others. Therefore, in some paradoxical ways, once we enter into the state of war, according to Locke, we actually transcend pure self-preservation, transcend the law of nature, because we start recognizing the want of others, and we take that into consideration in the formation of social contract society. And thus, it is actually the social contract that is moral, because that is what binds us together, rather than the purely individual law of nature. The immoral and amoral arguments that are applied to Locke stem from innatism and the transcendentalist reading of the law of nature. The amoral position holds that the law of self-preservation is neither good nor bad. It occupies a neutral territory, because self-preservation can either descend into madness and conquest, as Locke described, hence being immoral, or move toward a broader recognition of the preservation of others, which in some manner, my own recognition that my self-preservation depends on yours, leads to the emergence of morality. So as a result, the law of nature is actually simply amoral, because it can either descend into immorality or it could progress towards morality. Now, the immoral argument of Locke's law of nature takes the view that self-preservation is not necessarily contrary to nature per se. For someone like St. Augustine, he argued that we need no law to tell us to love ourselves and to try to preserve ourselves, but rather that because self-preservation is only concerned with the bodily ego, it will never truly move in any innate sense in the direction of social and relational goodness. Therefore, the only reason why we agree to stop killing each other is because I am simply motivated to preserve my own life. And I could care less about you, but so long as I'm able to get you to agree not to harm me, I come out the winner. And that is the basis of the immoral argument for understanding Locke's law of nature. So as we can see, Locke actually has a very contradictory understanding of the law of nature. In many ways, the law of nature in Locke must ultimately be overcome. We must shed the law of nature and embrace social contract society, because it is only in social contract society that my want for self-preservation and your want for self-preservation is manifested and upheld by law. And law is what binds us together. Law is what demands and enforces itself to make sure we do not harm one another. Because if you actually look at Locke, he clearly does not stand within the Ciceronian, Augustinian, Thomistic tradition of natural law. The natural law is not moral. The natural law is not aiming at social happiness, as it is in the classical and Christian tradition. In Locke, the law of nature, which is simply the law of self-preservation, is about the self. And in the eventual conflict of ourselves with one another, we must transcend the law of nature with the social contract. And by leaving behind the law of nature and by embracing the totalizing, binding reality of the social contract, of legal, positive law, only then can we leave behind the state of war, the state of conflict, and live in an orderly and supposedly peaceful society. Thus, the law of nature is progressive in Locke's understanding, because we will eventually progress away from the law of nature. Self-preservation will lead to a legal recognition in social contract law, and that, not the law of nature, but the law of the social contract, becomes binding for everyone.